Plant pests are essentially any kind of destructive, biotic force that interferes with the growth and production of your crop. There's a lot of different types of pests. The four main categories we'll be looking at this week are weeds, insects, animals, and disease-causing agents like pathogens such as virus and bacterial and fungal pathogens that can reduce the yield or actually kill your crop. And we'll also look at some different practices to help prevent these pests from becoming a problem, and also look at an integrated approach that can help control and manage these pests in different kinds of growing environments. Weeds, for example, there's no such thing as a plant that's always a weed, right? It's basically just a plant that's out of place. They grow dandelion greens for salads in some countries, purposefully in the garden. So essentially a weed is a plant in the wrong place. And this can be in your field-grown crops or underneath your benches in the greenhouse. And they impact crops a couple of different ways. They can outcompete the plant you're trying to grow because they're using the same resources like water and soil nutrients. And they can also kind of crowd out other plants. In the greenhouse, they can serve as a vector for disease or a hiding place for insects. Now, weeds typically, because in a native environment, our ecosystem, there's balances. Most weeds tend to be invasive species, meaning they are from somewhere else. They've either traveled here on the socks of someone, or tumbleweeds that roll as the wind blows them, some kind of adaptation to make them spread. And some are also brought here by greenhouse growers. A plant that is beautiful and well contained in somewhere in Asia brought here might grow out of control, unchecked in nature because of its lack of natural controls. Anyway, so these invasive species have a lot of adaptations that might allow them to outcompete native plants, like producing a lot of seeds or germinating more quickly than native seeds. Some of our weeds, for example, that field bindweed that we've all been pulling out of our gardens, that's like that mini morning glory. They have seeds that can stay dormant for more than 25 years. And so these adaptations allow them to kind of take over in environments, be that in your field where they could clog up agricultural equipment, or in the greenhouse where they just look bad and spread weeds and potentially diseases. Some weeds are just a nuisance, but others can be actually really harmful and toxic even to animals and sometimes to humans. Knapweed, poison hemlock, these are all what we consider noxious weeds here in Colorado. Weeds that are so bad that we actually have a legal obligation to control them. Here in our state, we actually have 3 different levels of weed classifications, kind of our typical garden weeds, all the way down to these noxious weeds that can hurt livestock and can be incredibly devastating to local environments. A good example is the tamarisk. It's a beautiful Mediterranean tree, sometimes called salt cedar, and you see it sometimes in botanical gardens on the East Coast. But here in Colorado, it populates along riparian environments in streams and creeks along the banks where it sucks up an incredible amount of water. And that devastates local and crowds out local native species and can also very much change the ecology of our waterways. And so we have a legal obligation if they're on our land to control them. So understanding what weed you're looking at and how dangerous it is and how to control it is an important part of integrated pest management. And we'll discuss the different methods of control later on this week. Invertebrate pests are pests that lack a backbone, they lack a spine, and this includes insects, which is the largest category of living organisms. They've got mammals and plants beat hands down. There's so many different kinds of insects. A lot of insects are actually really good. In fact, some insects we consider beneficials because they eat insects that might eat our plants. And so knowing the difference between a good insect and a bad insect, or a good arachnid and a bad arachnid, is important. So we'll talk a little bit about that and their ID later this week. Insects, of course, have 3 body parts and 6 legs, and our arachnids have the head here, and then the abdomen, 2 body parts, and then 8 legs typically, although you can't see a couple in that picture. But insects have different life cycles, and so understanding that some might live in soil for a certain part of time and might look different in one stage versus another is an important part of their control. Some live all above ground, some live all underground, And some pests have different parts of their life cycle where they're underground, for example, as grubs, and then as an adult, they might hatch and fly away as beetles. And so understanding their different life cycles gives us a better understanding of how to prevent them and also how to control them should we find them in our greenhouse. Vertebrates. So vertebrates, such as you and I, we have backbones, and we have some concerns depending on our crop. For example, turf grass, you might have problems with rodents underground. Birds can be a huge issue. If you're, for example, you have an orchard. And so humans tend to be the worst of all the animal pests, but essentially an animal pest is an organism with a backbone that is not in the right place, that's doing harm to your plants. If that's eating your seeds, like mice, for example, in your seed storage area, or humans, we can also damage crops and spread them. Diseases are caused by a lot of different types of pathogens, and we'll talk a lot about disease and the different conditions necessary for disease to infect a plant. Most of these are microscopic, and so we'll be talking about things like bacteria and fungi and virus that can infect your plants, and a lot about how we prevent them, because in some cases, like a virus, for example, we aren't able to treat them. So plant pests cause problems for growers in a lot of different ways. Obviously, they can reduce the appearance of crops they can affect. They can actually kill the crop themselves, the plant themselves. They can cost a lot of money in terms of loss in that way. And they also take a lot of energy and time to control. But there are a lot of benefits to proper pest management techniques, including avoiding problems in the first place. And so we're going to be looking this week at a holistic approach, an integrated approach to pest management. That includes things like mechanical control, biological control, as well as chemical control to make sure that pests don't become a problem for you and the plants that you're hoping to produce.